We ask you turn off your cell phones during the service with one important exception. Please feel free to have your phones to access our hearing assistance system, especially if you have T-coil. My name is Sue Johnston, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm your service leader for today. We will begin with words by Kimberly Ann Tonzak Carlson. It is not by chance that you arrived here today. You have been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside you, there is a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone nurtured you into being, installing a belief in a shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to us all when we share. And so, you begin seeking a beloved community, a people that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to the possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and to share your gifts. Welcome. Welcome home. Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. Today, Hamilton is home to many indigenous peoples from across North America, and the land here is covered by covenants and treaties. We are, all of us, treaty people, original inhabitants and those who came later, inheritors of a diverse history and dwellers in a common land, travelers towards a better life. We respect our relationships and responsibilities to both the land and the Aboriginal people who reside here. We give thanks for those who looked after these lands before we came. This morning, I would like to welcome Dr. Caitlin Boyle, a Hamilton-based violin and viola performer. She began her musical training at the Hamilton Suzuki School of Music and continued her studies at the New England Conservatory, the Glenn Gould School, McGill University, and the University of Toronto. As a music educator, Caitlin has taught the University of Toronto, Cardinal Academy of Arts, the Royal Conservatory of Music, the Festival of the Sound of Music Scores programs, and many school boards across Canada. A Juno-nominated performing artist, recipient of several international awards, she's performed and toured with many quartets. Caitlin currently teaches at the Hamilton Suzuki School of Music, performs with the Niagara Symphony Orchestra and the Shore Festival. She has a private Suzuki studio and is artistic director of the Chamber of Music series, 5 in the first. So please settle into your seats for this morning's prelude. We'll be hearing a lot more from Caitlin during the service. These words by Lisa Garcia Simpson. In these wild, historic, and uncertain times, we gather to remember who we are, who we belong to, and what we are called to do. As we light our chalice this morning, we kindle the spirit of the great turning, the movement for justice alive in this nation today. May we feel it in our bones, and in the stillness of this hour, may we sense it calling our name. Please join me in Mass chalice lighting words. May this flame be our light of friendship and love.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And I just have to say, it's so interesting to stand up here and witness the congregation listening to music. Almost everybody's eyes were closed except for the kiddos who were just like glued to you. It was just a beautiful moment to witness. Today, we are exploring the concept of belonging and trust, how these two concepts are intertwined and how we might not be able to experience one without the other. Let me use Reverend Darcy Lane's words to help us settle into this moment. So glad you are here. We're so glad you are here. Like a mantra, they repeat with warm smiles. You must be tired. You must be hungry. You must be cold. It means so much that you would come all this way to be with us. Do you still drink decaf? I made those walnut cookies that you like when I heard you were coming. Honey, take her bags. No, take my chair. I'll get another one from the den. Take your time. Rest a while. Stay as long as you like. So glad you're here. We're so glad you are here. Come, let us worship together. Our story this morning is entitled Lost in the Desert, a moral tale with an unknown author. Once, a man got lost in the desert. The water in his flask had run out 2 days ago, and he was on his last legs. He knew that if he didn't get some water soon, he would surely die. The man saw a small hut ahead of him. He thought it would be a mirage, or maybe a hallucination. But having no other option, he moved toward it. As he got closer, he realized it was quite real, so he dragged his tired body to the door with the last of his strength. The hut was not occupied, and it seemed like it had been abandoned for quite some time. The man entered it, hoping against hope that he might find water inside. His heart skipped a beat when he saw that it was in the hut, a water hand pump. It was a pipe going down through the floor, perhaps tapping into a source of water deep, deep underground. He began working the hand pump, but no water came out. He kept at it over and over and over, and still nothing happened. Finally, he gave up from exhaustion and frustration. He threw up his hands in despair. It looked like he might die after all. Then the man noticed a bottle in one corner of the hut, and it was filled with water and corked up to prevent evaporation. He uncorked the bottle, and he was about to gulp down the sweet, life-giving water when he noticed a piece of paper attached to it. Handwritten on the paper, it read, "Use this water to start the pump. Don't forget to fill the bottle when you're done." He had a dilemma. He could follow the instructions and pour the water into the pump, or he could ignore it and just drink the water. What to do? If he let the water go into the pump, what assurance did he have that it would work? What if the pump malfunctioned? What if the pump had a leak? What if the underground reservoir had dried up? But then, maybe the instructions were correct. Should he risk it? If it turned out to be false, he would be throwing away the last water that he would surely ever see. Hands trembling, he poured the water onto the pump. Then he closed his eyes, said a prayer, and started working the pump. He heard a gurgling sound, and then water came gushing out, more than he could possibly use. He luxuriated in the cool and refreshing stream. He was going to live. After drinking his fill and feeling much better, he looked around the hut. He found a pencil and a map of the region. The map showed that he was still far away from civilization, but at least now he knew where he was and that he could go in the right direction. He filled the flask for the journey, and he also filled the bottle and put the cork back in. Before leaving the hut, he added his own writing to the instructions. "Believe me, it works." This story is about life. It teaches us that we must give before we can receive. Also, it teaches that faith plays an important role in our giving. The man did not know if his actions would be rewarded, but he proceeded regardlessly. Without knowing what to expect, he made a leap of faith. We here are an intergenerational community, which means that we gather together across the generations, and sometimes we gather in our generational groups. We start services all together because it is so important for our children to be familiar with the practices of our faith and our community, and to witness incredible music. And it is important for our elders to experience the vibrancy of our children. These children are welcome to stay with their adults here in the sanctuary, or they can head over to Fellowship Hall for some conversation and generative play. Or maybe they're already in an owl class happening in one of our classrooms. As the families decide to stay or head down the hallway, we will begin our first hymn. Number 346 in the gray hymnal, 346. Come sing a song with me. The words will also be on the wall.
I invite you to listen to our music while we are collecting our offering. Your gifts and offerings are very much appreciated. Thank you.
This week, I had a meeting about sustainable volunteer management with several of our leaders and Layla, our interim support services manager. I shared these words for the opening of our meeting. They are entitled Living Our Unitarian Universalist Faith. They were anonymously written and I adapted them. I invite you to relax. Close your eyes if that feels safe in your body. Perhaps take a deep breath. Following our reading, there will be a few moments of silence and then music. During the music, you are welcome to come up and light a candle of joy, sorrow, or perhaps a moment of gratitude. But please first settle into your body. Living your Unitarian Universalism means if a grieving neighbor needs some companionship, you brew the pot of coffee and sit down to listen. Living your UUism means if your children or grandchildren steal toys from others, you take the time to explain why they must learn to share and respect one another. Living your UUism means if one of your kids or someone else near you is weeping from a broken heart, you reach out and wipe away the tears. Living your UUism means if your elderly relative or friend is living in a nursing home, you bring a song or a picture for their room to brighten their day. Living your UUism means if a coworker needs your principled defense, you take the risk to stand up for what is right. Living your you-ism means if your family member comes out as trans, you introduce them to your church community. Living your you-ism means if your community needs a recycling center or a tools library or a maker's market or a repair cafe, you volunteer to serve on the organizing committee. Living your you-ism means if some stranger is being harassed or demeaned in a joke, you speak up from your sense of justice and refuse to be an accomplice in that abuse. Living your you-ism means sharing of yourself from a place of vulnerability, knowing that this will give others permission to do the same. For these reasons, and for so many more, I urge you to live your Unitarian Universalism out loud.
We come now to a time in our service when we affirm the ways that we are connected in life as we live into the truth, and what affects one of us affects us all. In the spirit of community care, let us open our hearts to one another and that we hold sacred. Sometimes we have sorrows within our lives that are too tender to share, and there aren't any today. So we hold those in this space today with the reminder that we are never alone. Alongside the struggles and sorrows of this life, there are also joys to share, which we don't have. Milestones, blessings, celebrations of all kinds. So we are celebrating between us and rejoice in the happiness that flows through our community. And in the practice of experimentation, we have a new practice to include: gratitudes. The work of our church is never done. It's always humming along, and sometimes this work happens in visible ways, and other times it is unnoticed. But all of this work is worthwhile and worthy of celebration. This morning, we'd like to offer a gratitude and a huge thank you to Pat Ortell for her many years of volunteering to send cards to all the folks that submit joys and sorrows to be read on a Sunday morning service. Each card is usually signed from your friends at the Unitarian Church, and it's personal, empathetic, and timely. Pat, your generous and caring spirit serves us all well. So if you would like to have a joy, sorrow, or gratitude served with the larger congregation, you can do so by clicking on the link on our homepage or by writing something in the binder on the side of the sanctuary. Sharing the tender moments of our life and witnessing one another is part of building the web of beloved community. May we continue to hold space for this community care and share with courage and vulnerability.
In our story this morning, we witnessed a decision of trust being made. A moment where the man needed to practice trusting the world around him, and when he added his 4 little words to that note, "Believe me, it works." He was attempting to encourage others to trust the world as well. But the practice of trusting the world around us is becoming harder and harder, isn't it? All we have to do is look at the news for us to realize how hard it is to trust the world. So many of the systems that we have erected to help support and sustain our societies are not working the way we had envisioned. Politicians have been talking about proportional representation for decades, right? And yet, our provincial election 11 days ago, a premier won the majority government, even though his party received less than 43% of the overall vote. And that was with less than 45% of eligible voters turning up. This level of turnout speaks volumes regarding the effectiveness and therefore the trustworthiness of our societies and our democratic system. And it's not just the systems of representation within our democracy that feel untrustworthy in these moments. It's also our democracy's attempt to manage our resources to ensure that its people are able to survive. Our economic system has turned the most basic of human needs, those of food and water, shelter, sleep, clothing into commodities rather than necessities. This is why we witness people struggling to make their paychecks cover their expenses, because we have privatized the necessities of life. And we're on the verge of strengthening the bond between these two broken systems, in my opinion, with the possibility of electing an economist to lead the Liberal Party, and, if the polls can be trusted, potentially the Canadian government. This is an expert who studies the relationship between society's resources and its produce production, where the base assumptions are that human effort is directly related to their individual material reward, where the state influence or government oversight is seen as a hindrance to growth and disturbs the quote unquote natural order. Not to mention that a natural economic order leads to competition, decimation of the environment, a complete disregard of human physiological needs or our needs of safety. This leads me to have less trust in our systems, not more. Putting a banker in control of our systems inevitably means that there will be more money. And right now, I think we need more communal identity and social consciousness, which will not stem from more money. So how do we increase the trust within our communities, especially if our systems, the systems of our society seek to highlight, especially if the systems our society seeks to highlight are built on the continuation of privatizations of goods and services, where the government is more focused on GDP and isn't as worried about the conditions that lead to better health, well-being, or resiliency for their constituents. How do we raise our trust in this society, where democracy feels at risk and neighboring countries are being run by dictators? How do we find trust when society feels unjust, when the economic conditions take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few? In today's world, who here would trust that the water would help prime the pump and slate everyone's thirst? Building communities of belonging has become one of the ways that I attempt to build trust around me. And I hope that you all are willing to join me on that journey. Unitarian Universalists have a very long history of trust and belonging. Our covenants are a practice of belonging and trust, and the basis for creating covenants among people and those in power goes back more than 450 years. The Edict of Torda was a declaration for religious freedom, and it was signed by King John Sigismund in that day's Transylvania, or current-day Romania. This declaration stated that people could choose their own faith without the risk of being coerced by those in power. Sigismund was a man of many different religious beliefs. He started out as a Catholic and then converted to Lutheranism, and then again to Calvinism, and then finally to becoming a Unitarian after he invited Francis David to be his court preacher. Being influenced by David, Sigmund allowed the local communities to determine their own beliefs, trusting that these communities could create greater practices of belonging when they were given a choice. Unitarian Universalists hold this idea of religious freedom as a bedrock of our own faith communities. a practice that shows our commitment to theological freedom and love that reflects and enduring trust in human agency and the power of community. Another historical moment that brings into sharper focus our commitment to trust is the Cambridge Platform. This was a statement published roughly 100 years after the Edict of Torda. And this platform stated that the governance of the church should be organized by the members of that church and not by the presbytery or religious body, which had to keep them accountable. In addition to being responsible for governing themselves, the Cambridge Platform also articulated that each church would be responsible for deciding their own membership, their own leadership, and to share in the ministry of the community. The Cambridge Platform articulated that people could join whichever church they were willing to be in mutual relationship with or to be in covenant with. The Cambridge Platform is the reason that when we have new member recognition ceremonies here at UU Hamilton, we ask our new members if they are willing to be in relationship with us, to journey alongside us, sharing their gifts, their presence, and their services, to engage in actions that create a community and a world dedicated to love and justice, because we trust one another to show up and to belong with commitment and responsibility. Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Rod Richards, who is the minister in St. Louis, California, articulates this balance between belonging and trust in this way, quote, "Covenant begins with the extending of trust and respect. It is not based on whether or not we can prove such trust is warranted for each individual. It is not based on the idea that we will each live out the covenant perfectly. It is based on the fact that as members, we have all accepted our covenant as an articulation of our aspirations for how we wish to be together. It is based on the idea that trust is not created individually, but instead is rooted in the idea that we are better together, that we create trust together. It is based on the idea that indeed we can only be our full selves in relationship, that our highest aim is not to jealously guard what we have against others, which here I might add is the purpose of capitalism. It's our highest aim not to jealously guard what we have against others, but to share what we have in pursuit of common goals that benefit us all. We promise to practice in covenants as we build and rebuild and renew again our community. Insofar as we do that, we are indeed trustworthy. And when we fail to live up to the covenant, when we break that trust, we agree to return again to promise. Belonging has been one of the advertising features of religious community recently. Join like-minded people who share our values. Be seen and accepted for who you are. Be part of a community that looks after one another. This promise of belonging taps into a deep longing for connection, to have a place that is our own, and to know our purpose, to be seen, acknowledged, understood. But these wishes can only become a reality when we trust those we seek to be in relationship with. It is not a surprise that belonging so rarely actually pans out. Some of us are suspicious. Remember that promise of democracy I was talking about earlier? Or how great capitalism will be in a trickle-down economy? We have all experienced being on the wrong side of the door, or we have experienced barriers, physical barriers, systemic barriers, emotional barriers. We might be welcomed into a community, but we don't understand the process of joining or how we could receive care. What might support look like within a community, and how do new people learn about it? What kind of service can individuals participate in? How can somebody be of service in a community? Belonging can feel like an internal experience that comes about when the external conditions are actually met. It's a complicated thing to get right, especially if it doesn't happen organically. And how do we talk about this? Because saying something like not belonging can really cause an awkward experience. How are you supposed to put not belonging into a conversation with another person without causing that other person to start questioning their own behaviors and their own belonging? Belonging is an experience of alignment between our inner world and the outer world that we choose to surround ourselves in. Belonging happens within a social context, and therefore attempts to find belonging can put others in a place of having to express or protect their own understanding, their own security, and their own trust in community. Avoiding talking about belonging might feel a lot easier, less risky, less vulnerable. But perhaps belonging matters right now precisely because so many of us are struggling with feeling like we don't belong. These have all been some of the questions that are rolling around in my brain as the leadership here at UU Hamilton thinks about what it means to be a member, to belong, to become part of this community, and how we can reach out and welcome others into our circle of belonging. We are discussing what it means to create trust and to develop pathways towards belonging and pathways towards participation, pathways towards service and leadership. And it is because we are wanting to deepen the experiences of belonging that we are attempting to make these pathways a little bit clearer and hopefully more visible. This is why we are reminding everyone, and what a perfect Sunday to say this. This is why we are reminding everyone to share their joys and sorrows, and why we are starting to highlight the gratitudes we have for those who serve and weave the webs of our community fabric a little bit tighter, to help us learn about, build trust with, and find connection among one another. Our meditation piece this morning calls us to help weave this fabric of belonging by articulating what it means to live our Unitarian Universalism. My dear colleague, and several years ago, a student minister here at UU Hamilton, the Reverend Karen Fraser Gitlitz, recently wrote a sermon entitled, "Why Belonging?" for the Canadian Unitarian Universalist community. Indeed, it was her description of that service that inspired me to speak about trust and belonging today. In her introduction to the service, she wrote, "The mature spiritual community recognizes that the longing that brings us into community is not sufficient enough to create the community that we crave. Belonging takes work, personally and communally. When we dig below the fantasies of our longing into the deep, rich earth of our experiences, then we can find the belonging that takes root in our bones. There we find the belonging that recognizes, appreciates, and makes space for one another. A spiritually mature community on the path to becoming beloved." Belonging takes work. The longing that so many of us feel fulfilled when we walk into this building and into this sanctuary likely did not come easily the first few times you entered, the first few months, maybe even the first few years. Perhaps it still doesn't feel easy, and I would argue that maybe it shouldn't. If we seek to dismantle the barriers of inclusion within our institutions and within ourselves, this means that we still have work to do, and that work isn't always easy. But if we can find and create communities of belonging and trust, then it is a pathway that I will continue to travel, and I hope you travel alongside me. And now let us sing our convictions. Hymn number 1008 in the teal hymnal, "When Our Heart is in a Holy Place," 1008.
Sorry, I'm getting there. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in
These chalice extinguishing words were written by Reverend Scott Taylor, based on the words by MLK. Faith is taking the step even when you can't see the whole staircase. Go with faith, not the kind that is called to move mountains, but the quieter sort that calls us to take the first step, even when the whole staircase sits beyond our view. As we stride toward the unseen, may we notice that the way unfolds only as we risk to see it, only as we risk to travel it. And may we remember and trust that none of these steps are ones we take alone. May it be, and may we make it so.